Mark Schiff for the podcast Don't Know Schiff, and I'm here with my co-host, Lowell Benjamin, and today we have a special guest, a gentleman I've known for a long time. When I see him, I always feel a little better, and we have Bill Boggs. Hello, Bill.
Mark, thank you.
Great to see you.
Bill has had many talk shows. He was the guy in New York when I was coming up as a comedian. You wanted to get on his Midday live show. He's now a writer of books, and you've never not been doing something in show business, so congratulations to you.
Well, I appreciate you're recognizing it. Yeah, I actually got out of graduate school and was working like the world's most boring job for the Armstrong Cork Company as a writer. And my friend Jay Tarsus was having his second child with Jamie, with his wife. And I said, and he needed money. The guy was working for Allen Fund for $100 a week. I said, come down here to Lancaster, PA, work in this company. You'll earn some money, Jay, regroup. So Jay Tarsus comes down. The cubicle next to him is Tom Patchett. They started out of frustration writing sketch comedy routines for a duo. One day I heard one of the routines in the hall. I said, let's get out of here. I'll be your manager. And 6 months later, they were on the Merv Griffin show. So I started my career managing a comedy team. I was in my mid-20s, and I've been in show business ever since.
It's unbelievable. Congratulations. And let's just tell the people who may not know, Jamie Tarsus was the head of NBC, his daughter.
ABC.
That's correct.
ABC. Yeah. And did she also, Saturday Night Live, did she have something to do with that?
I mean, she was an executive at ABC. She was involved in Saturday Night Live, and Patchett and Tarsus would go on as a writing team to write for Newhart. I mean, major writing. Mary Tyler Moore. They wrote the first two Muppet movies, and then they split up. And Tom created one of the co-creator of Alf, and Jay did Days and Nights of Molly Dodd. I saw Tom when I was on the West Coast. I usually come out to the West Coast in February for a couple of weeks. We can get together. I'd love that. And so I look back at those early days, fellas. And it was wide open. I remember, just to have some reminiscing, right? Managing a comedy team, seeing Lily Tomlin doing stand-up in like 67, seeing George Carlin with a coat and tie,
Wow.
Doing Al Sweet, really early Dangerfield, Joanne Worley, Joan Rivers. I'd known Joan at that time.
Where did you see these people? Did you go down the Village to see them when they were working out?
Tom and Jay, we'd come to New York, and Patchett and Tarsus would play like the bitter end. That basically, they played the bitter end and they played the improv. And then Joyous Monk had a room in the Plaza Hotel called the Plaza 9. And that was like a sketch room, stuff that doesn't even exist anymore, doing reviews, right? And he loved Tom and Jay. So they worked there. And then we were in New York, they would do guest shots. Like, I will remember there were a couple little clubs downtown that aren't there anymore, where there were comedians. And one night I saw Lily and Joanne and George Carlin. I'm talking 1967, a long time ago, right before you guys were. That's how I began my career, working with brilliant writers like Patchett and Tarsus. I contributed things every now and really it was like taking up the master's degree in comedy writing early on.
So let me ask you this. You had never been a manager.
No.
And all of a sudden you're managing.
That's right.
A comedy team. How does somebody do this? That takes, balls is the word. I mean, how do you approach somebody and go, I've never done this in my life. Put your life in my hands.
Here's what happened. So they did this routine for a couple of secretaries in the hallway. And we have to go back to folks listening now. Back in the 60s, you had, name them, Rowan and Morton, Stiller and Mira, Mike Nichols and Elaine May. There were
Smothers Brothers
doing sketch comedy. Two people on stage doing a routine. I had been in high school and in college in a comedy team where we'd write material and do material, and every once in a while I get up on stage, particularly in high school. So I had a strong sense of that. I loved Martin and Lewis. I loved Abbott and Costello. I always thought Roland and Morton were kind of weak, but I watched them. Nichols and May were great. Patchett and Tarsus were in the Nichols and May zone. So I watched this routine in the hallway. I knew Jay to be a very funny guy, and Tom I didn't really know very well. So I said, do another routine. So they did this routine. This is a well-told story about a toll taker on the Pennsylvania Turnpike and the ticket going back and forth. In the middle of the routine, I had what our French friends call a coup de foudre, a bolt of lightning, literally.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get out of here, go in the show business. So I called him back I said, come to the office. I said, look, I've got an idea. This material is great. We all hate our jobs. We all want to get out of here, right? So I'll start booking you around in little clubs, little coffee houses and stuff like that, folk houses. And if it gets traction, eventually we'll leave our jobs and go into show business full time. And that process from that day until we left Armstrong took about 6 months. And when you say that the balls to do it is in anything in life, you just have to have a confidence that you can do it. I knew I could sell. I mean, what is managing? Selling. Well, I thought I'd be their agent. I didn't realize I end up as what is called a personal manager. And I grew up in a house with my father on the black rotary phone. I could hear him selling. I didn't even question that I could do it. It was not even, never a question in my mind.
How does one live? So this is the deal. You book these guys, they got a $75 gig, and you're getting what, 10, 15% of it? You're getting $7?
I got 15%. If it went to a certain point, I got 20%.
What were they earning that you could earn a living?
Well, first off, I wasn't. So in order to supplement, we quit our jobs. They had families, right? They were able to support their families by playing clubs, basically. But I supported myself with my percentage by being a substitute teacher. I mean, I worked at the University of Pennsylvania as a dean, and it wasn't like a full-time job managing one act. I had an opportunity. I met with Lil, her agent wanted me to meet with Lily. I had lunch with Lily at the Plaza about potentially managing Lily because I was doing a good job, but it just wasn't really what I wanted to do with my life. I had my own ambition to be on television, but that's basically how we earn the money. Basically, they'd get booked into Playboy clubs, make good money there. There was a place in Georgetown, the Cellar Door.
Sure. I played there. Lenny Bruce played the Cellar Door.
Yeah, some of the acts they opened like if I off the top of my head, they opened for let's see, Oscar Peterson, Judy Collins, Rick Nelson, who was excellent, Buddy Rich, the Everly Brothers, the Chad Mitchell Trio, and later John Denver replacing the Chad Mitchell Trio, and others whom I probably can't remember. Oh, Modern Jazz Quartet. A lot of shows with the Modern Jazz Quartet. So we were able to make enough money to keep going. Actually, I believe the second year combined income was more than what we're making at Armstrong Corp Company. So from the talent will out, from the very beginning, the combination Tom and Jay with me pushing worked.
Just a quick thing, because you said something and I didn't want to let it fly by. You said you were a substitute teacher.
Yeah.
And a dean. How do you go from substitute teaching to become the dean of a college or what?
No, it was the small little known school called the University of Pennsylvania, which had been my alma mater. I was an undergraduate and graduate there. And I wouldn't say I was a big man on campus at all, but I had been president of my fraternity. I had good in there. And because I had the master's degree, they were looking for a couple of young deans. One, the assistant dean of men, was divided at the time. And they knew me and actually called me and asked me if I'd do it. And I said, yeah, but I have to have 1 day a week off. I'll do it 4 days a week in case I have to go someplace with the comedy team. So
that's hysterical. You could have managed the other deans if you were,
The others was one assistant dean. Man, this guy came in with the worst hangovers I've ever seen. It was he was about a year younger than I was. He got so drunk one night. He was a very good golfer. He got so drunk one night. He went out in Walnut Street. He was teeing up golf balls and hitting them down Walnut Street. The guy was like completely nuts, and he was like an authority figure on campus.
You mentioned watching sketch comedy shows. Growing up in your household, was comedy a big thing?
Oh yeah. Well, after my father died, I don't know, several months later, my mother and I were talking about how she was adjusting, it's sad, living alone. You know what this is like, guys. And she said, you know what I miss the most? Laughing in the
Hmm.
morning. Yeah, I think both my father and mother had a good sense of humor, had hearty laughs, and I grew up. My best friend from about fourth grade on through high school was a very smart guy, John Helsel, and he and I would walk to school, tried to top each other with jokes and shtick, and it was with whom I was in the comedy team of Boggs and Helsel. A little remembered act, I must.
What kind of material did you do?
The kind of material we did was, we actually auditioned for Ted Back's amateur hour. We didn't get one. Oh, man, honestly, I can't tell you. Probably teenage stuff, wanting
Sure.
girls, something like that.
You've done so many things in entertainment. Was there sort of in the back of your mind, like the ultimate dream would have been to host TV shows or be a stand-up or anything like that?
Well, yes, actually. So what happened, I'm getting a prop. What happened was, if I look at my life, was pretty much as two major, like the Rosebud thing with me is about 4 years old. I would see men going off to work, look out the window, and then coming home sort of tired, walking down the street. And I knew someday I'm going to be a man, and someday I'm going to have a job. And I kind of made a deal with myself. Whatever I do, I want to be as much fun as possible. And then I became, because of my age, fascinated. The best thing that ever happened to me as a growth experience, educational experience, when I was 4 years old, my parents bought me a little radio. So I listened to this radio at night. They would think I was asleep. And back in those days, you were listening to comedy shows like on the radio, Jack Benny, Bob Hope, Burns and Allen on the radio. And then I particularly loved Art Linkletter and People Are Funny and Arthur Godfrey. And I wanted to be like the men on the radio. This is honest to God. My mother says, I don't remember this. When I was a little boy, I used to walk around with a pencil pretending it was a microphone, interviewing people. So while I started the career with Patchett and Tarsus in comedy, because getting out of graduate school, I needed a job, I needed a car, and I settled and took this boring job at Armstrong. I had no intention in my whole life. I figured I'm not being here the rest, but within a month, I realized this is a big mistake. I should have just continued looking for a job like a Channel 10 in Philadelphia, just driving a truck, anything. So yes, I had that. I had the distinct dream that I wanted to be a talk show host all my life. So after 3 years with Tom and Jay, I had an opportunity to be on a show in Philadelphia called McLean and Company. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you guys ever met the agent, William Morris agent, Debbie Miller. At the time, I think you'll like the story. I was working while managing Tom and Jay, I was working at Channel 10 as a talent coordinator on a morning talk show. I had gotten in there because the classmates, originally I was working as an IATSE guy, was in a union. But I worked my way up, and I was a talent coordinator for a show, and Patchett and Tarsus had been on the Mike Douglas show 3 or 4 times. Now, set the scene. Tom Snyder, who would go on to a very big career, national career, was leaving KYW and his morning show at 9 a.m. They wanted to create a new morning show, and Debbie Miller was working for Roger Ailes and Woody Frazier, who were producers of the Douglas show. She was a hotshot.
Mike Douglas.
Mike Douglas, excuse me.
Right.
Mike Douglas show, syndicated out of Philadelphia. Big show and a forgotten name in terms of talk shows. So she had to put together a staff. And she calls me because she met me when they were on the Mike Douglas show, Tom and Jay. Takes me to lunch and offers me the job as her associate producer, telling me, I think you've got everything it takes to be a really great producer. I see what you've done with the comedy team. You can still manage the comedy team and work on the new morning show. I said, what's the show going to be? She says, we're going to have one host. And my idea is, 5 rotating regulars who'll do something like every day, different thing every day, one each day. So she gives me this offer. And I said, Debbie, I'm flattered, but Tom and Jay and I are set to move to California. You know how well they've done. I think there's gold in them there hills, right? And she says, I understand that. So I have to decline the job. She says, I understand that. Then she takes a breath and said the words that changed my life. what would it take for you to stay?
Hmm.
That is a great negotiating sentence. So, guys, I said, okay. You say that you're going to have regulars each day, 5 regulars. You let me be your associate producer and one of those regulars. I'll be on television every week. I don't want to audition. I know I can do it. I'm a performer. I don't want people saying, what? He's a comedy manager. How can he be on? I don't want to be limited. You let me be one of those people and I'll have an amicable parting with Tom and Jay. That's how I got started in TV. As Mr. Weekend, I would be at one every Friday telling people in Philadelphia where to go for the weekend, which in those days was go to New York. There's nothing happening here.
How did that then lead you to going to New York? Were you doing the same kind of work back then?
No, so that what I know eventually we're going to talk about my satire, my book. So after, let's see, 2 years,
Mhm.
2+ years of doing that, it was like playing for the Phillies, getting one at bat a week,
Mhm.
So I made a New Year's resolution going into 1971 into 72 that I'd go anywhere in America to get my own talk show because I reasoned, sure, I'm in Philadelphia. Sure, at this point, it's the third or fourth largest market. I'm only on 1 day a week. If I can go someplace where I can do what I want to do every day, even if it's a tiny little market, I'll be a happier guy and I'll learn stuff.
Mhm.
So I just started telling everybody, and someone who knew me ended up at a station called WGHP-TV in High Point, North Carolina. And they said they're looking for a host of a morning show live. I went down, I auditioned, and I got the job. So my first big break and some of the best work of my life was done during the 3 years, 72, 73, 74, that I hosted and produced Southern Exposure, which got syndicated to 4 stations in the South and beat the Today Show the entire time it was on the air. My associate producer and my intern was Richard Baker, who was going on to manage Tim Allen and Drew Carey. You guys know Richard Baker, Messina Baker, and we produced Comedy Tonight with him. And that success led me to New York.
So at Midday Live, when you made it to New York, that was amazing. The people you interviewed, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Dustin Hoffman, Ted Kennedy, so many people.
Right, don't forget Natalie Wood, one of my all-time favorite guests, and
Yeah.
Martha Stewart. I'm just a lot.
Yeah, amazing. That's what I mean. Countless amazing, timeless, historic
Tennessee
interviews.
Williams.
Tennessee Williams,
Ram Dass.
I have Ram Dass, 400, almost 500 of these interviews are
Yeah.
available. Parts of them, Bill Boggs TV. It's on YouTube. It's
Yeah.
free. Somebody
I've been
watch
there. It's an amazing look back
it,
at
subscribe.
some of these people. I mean, I just loved it. I just saw Miles Davis the other day, and
Miles Davis,
that was an incredible interview, and it was interesting to watch you trying to figure out how to get to this guy.
Well, let me tell you the story behind that very quickly. I was at a restaurant in Melrose having dinner with a woman who had a drinking problem. And sometimes after her second martini, she'd be like Julie Andrews, the happiest person in the room, and other times she'd be like Hannibal Lecter. On this,
By the way, those are the most fun women.
yeah, this didn't
Don't discard that.
on this particular night. She's starting at me. She's going on. And her voice is coming up, and my voice is coming up, and we're not yelling, but we're going on. And all of a sudden, I feel this tap on my shoulder. I look up. Miles Davis? Bill Boggs. And I've been watching you for years. You're like my Today Show. I want to meet your woman. So he goes over and he's hugging her. Man, the charisma coming off of Miles Davis, the cologne, the outfit. So after it's over, he gives me he said, I want you to come and see me at Avery Fisher Hall. So he gives me his manager, and 2 weeks later, I go by myself to Avery Fisher Hall. There's a little note, Mr. Davis wants to see you backstage. This is when I'm doing a show in Philadelphia. This is that Miles Davis interview was in Philadelphia after Midday.
Wow.
So I go backstage, of course, and this is where I look in the dressing room, and he's in there, and he's got his foot up on a chair. He's eating an orange, and he's talking to 2 beautiful African-American women, and the trumpet is on its own little chair over the side. Boggs, get in here. I walk. Come here, Boggs. Come here. Yeah. let me have your ear. Okay. I lean over and he says, I saved your ass in LA, didn't I?
Ha
Because once he came over, order was restored. And then he actually said, I'd like to be on your show. He actually asked. I said, sure. And he came down of his own volition all the way from New York to Philadelphia to do that interview. So I had felt a closeness to Miles. He had told me wonderful things about my work. Right. And so, although it was a very big deal having him there for him to do, a local talk show like that, I felt pretty relaxed with him. People look at that and they project a lot into it. Like, Miles doesn't like this guy, or this guy, and we really had a nice relationship, and that's which is what led to it.
That was amazing.
The Sammy Davis Jr. interview you did was over an hour. And in today's world of podcasts, people do the deep dives like that. But back then, I think that was probably pretty rare. So did Sammy mean a lot to you?
Yeah,
How was that?
This is a story I rarely tell, and it's an ugly story, but I'm going to tell it. When I was working there at the University of Pennsylvania, assistant dean, the phone rang one day, and it was Ken Roberts, who at that time, who went on to found KRAC Radio. But at this point, he's got a little company called University Concert Productions, right? So Ken it's a great idea. He's booking major acts on campuses. This had never happened before. And he's offering us, University of Pennsylvania, Sammy Davis Jr. So I say, Ken, obviously I love Frank Sinatra. I was a big Frank Sinatra. At this point, I had seen Frank by 1968 dozens of times, but I had not met him yet. Anyway, so what happened is, in order to pull off the event, and he was going to be at the Spectrum, at the Round, at the University of Pennsylvania, I had to go, the other teen dean, the drinker, and I had to go to essentially the Student Association to get their imprint. The Student Association presents Sammy Davis Jr. because that's how events were done at Penn. So we go to, we set up a meeting, and essentially it's just two guys, like the president of it. Both of the guys at the University of Pennsylvania, you had people from hardworking middle-class families, went to public school like me, and you had a lot of elite fellows from boarding schools, St. A's and stuff like that. So these guys were in pretty exclusive, completely WASP fraternity, right? And we pitched a thing. This is what the guy said to us, quote, we don't want that N-word on campus. This is like 1968. And they said it again. So Paul and I close the door. We go back and say, these fuckers, that's terrible. In order to get Sammy on campus, we had to completely go around the Student Association and go to the Interfraternity Council, which had never staged an event. They had a charity thing that did once a year. They said, we love this. And we told them the whole story. So these two guys and a couple of others at the Student really had it in for me. They did everything. I'm not kidding. They did everything in their power to discredit me. They made up a couple of fake news stories that way. They tried to get my transcripts published. I was basically like a B student, and really created a lot of problems for me personally. So, but the night of the show, the Spectrum is packed with people. In the Round, there's an orchestra, and I'm with Ken Roberts, the other dean, an assistant, and Sammy Davis is in the little anteroom, and all he wanted was a bottle of great Manischewitz wine. So we're pretty close to the door, and somebody says to Ken Roberts, who knew nothing of this, he knew nothing of the N-word, none of that. You have no idea what Boggs had to go through to pull this off. What do you mean? And then Paul, the other assistant dean, explains the thing, says everything, uses the N-word. And Sammy comes out and he says, Bill, you did that for me? Absolutely. We shook hands and we were friends ever since. And that's a rarely told story, but you got me in a storytelling mood. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. Good for you for
Thank you. Yeah, that's
fight for that.
pivotal moment. There are times you just have to do the right thing. Period.
Right. I saw a clip the other day of Sammy Davis and Nat King Cole doing impressions of each other. It was unbelievable. It just made me smile. Nat King Cole is doing Sammy, Sammy's doing Nat, and Nat's at the piano. It was just beautiful. So
in today's world of comedy, are there any major impressionists? I know Dennis Blair used to be singing impressions. Anybody doing impressions like the old days of impressions? I don't know.
Frank
No.
Caliendo is pretty good. If you've ever seen him, he's got a
believe it or not,
very wide range.
I just spoke to Rich Little. I was at the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas, and he has a show 4 days a week at 6 p.m. show.
Good for him.
In Las Vegas. He does a retrospect. And Rich Little, like you, has worked with everyone in show business.
Yeah.
Absolutely remarkable. One of my old favorites was George Kirby, who passed on young, drugs terribly, but he was quite the impressionist too. So,
Yep.
Were there any other ones that jump out at the top of mind of like impactful interviews?
Hold on just a second. Leslie
Uggams is there. Unbelievable.
No, not Leslie. I did interview Leslie Uggams. I like good singer.
Leslie Nielsen.
Leslie Nielsen I interviewed for Bill Boggs Corner Table on the Food Network.
There's no name that we can't come up with that you won't say in your interview. So let's.
Jerry's I never interviewed Jerry. I interviewed Leno and Cosby. I'm sorry, you'll have to edit out that word. Interviewed a lot. Interviewed Dangerfield. I love comedians. I never interviewed Carlin, whose work really holds up, and it's just great.
So, by the way, with Jerry, the 6 times you came over to our table at the River Cafe.
Yes, well, I miss those on January 1st.
January 1st, it was Larry Miller, Jerry Seinfeld, Paul Reiser, fellow you may not know, Michael Hampton Kane, and myself. And you were always at the River Cafe having lunch. Why don't we tell that?
Yeah, New Year's Day. Well, to me, I love the River Cafe. People say your favorite restaurant in New York. I'll say, yeah, Patsy's out of the River Cafe. What an experience. So I started to I was there a couple times New Year's Eve. I started to pull back from doing anything New Year's Eve and get up in the morning really hungry and go have, for me, a boozy lunch, maybe puff a pot afterwards and bring in January 1st at the River Cafe. And then that slipped away. I've been in Palm Beach for a while, and I didn't come because you guys were there. It was a very nice coincidence to be able to see you each year. Yeah.
It was very nice. People don't know the River Cafe was under the Brooklyn Bridge. And you sit, it's one of the greatest views in the world. You sit there and you see the
food. Great food.
Right. To the right, you see the Brooklyn Bridge. To the left, you see the Statue of Liberty. Mm-hmm. It was quite the view. Yeah. The food was good. And we always were happy to see you come over the table for a few minutes and we talked. It was, by the way, I had an experience. I never did your show, but one time I came to a taping, you had Bob Lemon on. Do you remember this? He was the Yankees manager.
Yes, Bob Lemon, sure.
So I asked a stupid question. You took questions from the audience, and I asked a stupid question, and you may not remember this, but Bob was insulted.
I said, I remember this, but you do, so tell us.
Well, it's a quick thing. So you said any questions? I raised my hand and I said, I'm a comedian. And I said, Bob, can I come to Yankee Stadium and sing the Star Spangled Banner? And he said, I'm offended by that. And I'm not going to do the show again. He just took it the complete wrong way. He was so upset at this thing. And I felt bad. I mean, I thought maybe I blew out one of your guests. But I never forgot that. It was quite.
Well, you were on Comedy Tonight, though, Mark.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, you were. Richard Baker and I produced the Comedy Tonight. That's while I was doing Midday during the week. And then that was the hardest working period of my life. I was on camera 9 7-day weeks, consecutive, 63 straight days. But that was a lot of fun.
So you're one of these guys that really tried to help break young comedians.
Well, that Comedy Tonight, syndicated 120 stations, the first show in the history of television to feature just stand-up comedians. And I was your jovial host, and Richard and I put the show together. We had some good. Whoopi was on that show a couple of times.
I heard you mention that
talk
And
about
can-
my book at all? I just want to check.
Yeah,
Of
we are
course.
going to talk about the book.
No, you don't have to do it right now. Just
No, I promise.
we're working
Listen,
our way
I
up.
wrote,
up in full having a good time mode. 100%.
I wrote a book recently myself,
I
and
like your book. Yes.
I know, and you did the video, and you just said the nicest thing, so I appreciate it. But I know how important it is to talk about it, and we will. I promise you, because I've done podcasts myself where they don't bring up the book. I go,
Well, the thing, I tell you what have found as a host is if you get the plug out of the way in the beginning, this does not apply to me now because I knew you were going to do that. But on television, like where it's a limited amount of time, if you get the plug out of the way in the beginning, then they're not sitting there worried about when am I
right.
But put that aside. I know that we're
Great
going
piece of advice. That's a question I wanted to ask you, by the way, about.
Yes.
I joked with you the other day. I said you're going to come on the show and you'll learn what it's like to be a talk show host. So, what is the secret behind your success as a talk show host? Because you were one of the best. I
Thank
mean,
you.
what could you tell a young person coming up that wants to do this sort of thing? And now it's the podcast world.
Yeah, well, podcasts are first off, I'd love to help anybody use my experience because you get to a certain point in life and you want to pay it forward. I think the thing that helped me enormously was when I was on that show in Philadelphia, McLean and Company as the associate producer and Mr. Weekend. The host was a guy named Bob McLean.
Mm-hmm.
McLean would have notes, but he just really would just sit there, and I saw him listen, be in the moment. Now, this is a key, and respond to what he's really listening to rather than the next thing on his list. Listen with the intention of understanding and responding rather than immediately moving on to the next thing. So I think the number one thing, and you're certainly doing it here, I mean, you have some prepared things you wanted to talk about, is really listen to your guests. And the other thing is it's really one of those things that you can't fathom exactly what it is, but on television, not podcasts so much, there's a spatial relationship between you and your guests. Prior to the person coming out there, if there's some way to relax that person, maybe every once in a while, I would tell a guest if I thought they're going to be withholding, I might tell them something very personal. Like, I'll just make up an example. Like, oh man, by the way, have you seen these signs about bed bugs all over New York? Oh yeah. You know what happened to us at Christmas time? We got bed bugs on like December 18th. We had to move into a hotel. The whole thing cost $18,000. It was horrible. And then but what you've done is you've taken that person into your confidence. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You want exactly the opposite to occur. So it's a little bit of a trick, a little bit. I think the main thing is listening and figuring ways not to make the guests uptight, relaxed. The single most frequent compliment I got, I haven't thought of this for a while, was you really made me relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
Felt relaxed. Now, I don't know why. Maybe it's just an innate thing. Like, I've been looking forward to being on with you guys more than any podcast I've ever done. That is not show business.
Wow.
BS. Well, Lisa Lampanelli. Because I love talking to people in the business, really
Sure.
in the
But it definitely comes through in your interviews that it seems like the guests are very relaxed. One that jumped out to me was the Pete Rose interview because I think he's kind of known as very intense, but it seemed like a very playful side of him that you brought out.
Right. That's why I like people to subscribe to Bill Boggs TV because we just put that up in the last week. I'm discovering stuff all the time. I've got Elliot Gould is in the pipeline, an interview with we just put up Billie Jean King. So there's a few remaining things I have to put up on Bill Boggs TV. It's been for years I thought, what am I going to do with all these tapes?
So glad you saved them. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that essentially my archive, my life work will live on YouTube.
Right.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's amazing.
So
Was there anybody you interviewed that really surprised you when you sat down and got talking with them?
No,
Okay.
I can't say, well, I was stunned or really surprised, but no, I can't.
How about when Sinatra came to your interview? Did he come with a bodyguard or people around him?
Frank came to the show with his a soon-to-be wife, Barbara. They got married. He was on the show in early October of 75. They got married the next July. And Julie Rizzo, just two people, and his driver. The the story of how I met Sinatra is worth telling. Since you want to hear, a story.
Absolutely.
I a quick answer. My parents loved Sinatra. When I was working in Ocean City as a bellhop, where I met Jay Tarsis, how life goes. Like, Sinatra was performing one summer at the 500 Club, doing 3 shows a night. And all of the older kids loved Sinatra, right? And I was like a freshman in college, the older ones, the law students. So I snuck into the 500 Club just as a busboy in the back door to see Sinatra. This is a mobbed up club. I didn't know it, but I was very easy. I just dressed as a busboy. I found out what they wore, walked in through the kitchen, out, started setting up tables until the show started. It was great. And then Buddy Lester is the opening act. And I'm 17 years old. I'd never been in a nightclub. And I'm looking, these men with these big cufflinks, smoking cigarettes, women, low pointed dresses, big hair, and they're screaming and going back. Buddy Lester has sort of got and I think to myself, how can anyone sing to this people like this? They're wild. And once the show started with Buddy, I took off the jacket, put it on a long tie. I stood in a pillar, probably about 30 feet from the stage. Great view. Sinatra comes out. He has an audience in the palm of his hand. I mean, I really fell in love with Sinatra that night. And that started my buying records and going to see him. And that was 1960. So 15 years later, during the period of time, this is, you really got to depth story there. But during the period of time, I started having a really pleasant dream that I was with Frank Sinatra. And the dream was always pretty much the same. I had it a couple times a year. I'm with Frank, but sometimes it is Frank, but it wasn't Frank. It looked like Frank, but it was always Frank Sinatra. We're talking, and I'd wake up, oh, wasn't that nice? So on the Friday morning of a weekend where I'm set to meet a lot of friends in Las Vegas, and we're going to already have set to see Elvis early show and Sinatra late show, I woke up in the morning with the most intense version of the Sinatra dream I've ever had. I'm in a chair, Frank's in a chair, and we're talking. And I thought to myself, this could have been a precognitive dream. So I went and I did Midday. I had to race to the airport to make it the flight to Vegas. But I said to Paul Noble, who's still alive, I can verify it. I said, Paul, I just have this feeling I'm going to meet Frank this weekend, and he's going to come and do Midday.
Wow.
Happy. And it happened. 4:00 in the morning, I was wandering around, not looking for anything, ran into Julie Rizzo. It was actually 3:30 in the morning. He says, come back to the Galleria Lounge at 4. He knew me from Sammy. See that Sammy connection?
Mm-hmm.
It's back to that story I told you about Sammy. He knew me from Sammy. And I'd met Julie a couple times. And he said, would you like to meet Frank? Of course. 4:00 on Easter Sunday morning, I get introduced to Sinatra. And we talked for about 10 minutes. I told him how I'd stuck into the 500 Club. It had been in the paper because we went back the next night. I went back the next night to do it and took pictures with my friend because no one would believe it. And the owner of our hotel called Skinny D'Amato with the 500 Club and said,
Sure.
You're not going to believe this. I got 2 kids here who snuck into your club twice this week. And it made it into the land. Sinatra says, you're the guy? I said, yeah. I know.
Great.
So, yes, at the conclusion of the talk, about 4:15 in the morning, in a really lovely way, Frank says, now, Julie says you have a show on 5. Yeah, Channel 5, WNEW, yeah. He said, well, Billy, he always called me Billy. Billy, I don't want to promise anything, but I'm coming to New York in September with Ellen Basie, and maybe I'll swing by and do your show. Guys, this is hand to God. I want it like this, Frank. I'm not asking for anything. And I really meant it. And that was my initial I'm not asking, because people always want, and he takes my hands, pulls them down, pulls me in, and says, "Billy, I know you're not asking. Maybe I'll come." And
Mm.
he, and that is one of my old songs. People say, "Why is Sinatra your favorite guest?" The fact that it happened like that I had had a dream about it. And when he appeared on my show, he had never been on a talk show before, and it made headlines around the world. I look to the higher powers of show business, literally, to make that connection happen. Really all goes back to that dressing room at the University of Pennsylvania. It's almost
That's
like
an
a
incredible story. Absolutely incredible Sinatra story.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to have to tell Tom Dreesen to listen to this because he needs to hear that story.
Yeah, he should. He should hear that story. I like Tom. I read Tom's book too. I like
Yeah, he's
Tom.
amazing. So the 500 Club, that's where Martin and Lewis got their start.
Yes, allegedly, although if you read the details, they had fooled around in the Catskills. There had been some fooling around. They had been on the same bill. But that's where apparently Dean was opening for Jerry. Dean replaced somebody at the last moment. And then Jerry and Dean just started up and it was ignited. And that's where it just took off like an atomic bomb. I mean, for the 10 years Martin and Lewis were together, they were one of the highest paid acts in show business. And
Right at the 500 Club, they said they would do the first show and it'd be this, and then the second show is completely different. And Jerry would be writing ideas on brown paper bags.
Yep.
You
I mean,
had you
I
had
never
Jerry
saw
on. You had Jerry on the show, right?
twice. Yeah.
I remember. So he's a bit of a wild guy. What was? Give us a little, if you don't mind, because I love Jerry Lewis. I had an experience with him. I asked him if we could take a photo together, and he said, "I don't swing that way." Like I was asking him to have sex. I said, "No, Jerry, I think you're mistaken. I just want a photo. I don't swing that way." And we ended up taking a photo together anyway. But it was so bizarre an answer to that question.
Jerry Lewis, as we well know, anybody in show business knows that Jerry Lewis had a reputation as a pretty prickly guy. I only can take people as I find them, which is a good way I try to look at life. So in 1980, first, I had written my first book in 1980. I was on a book tour, and I was in Las Vegas on a show. Jerry Lewis was on the show the same day. So I met Jerry there, and he was very friendly. You know, I'm a talk show host from New York. Then when he was in New York promoting, I think, the movie Hardly Working, he got booked on the show for the entire show. The first segment of the show, he was very not forthcoming, not like I thought he would be. And I got nervous. And not a lot of guests really. Gore Vidal was a guest who would make me nervous. But I'm actually, so I took a quick break for about 6-7 minutes. And he was on for the whole show. I said, "Jerry, I'm nervous." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Jerry, I've been a fan since I was a little kid. I remember when I was in high school, my mother saw you and Dean on the beach doing the drowning routine. And I guess I'm just like nervous in your presence." And that unwrapped him. It was true. I was nervous. I wasn't BSing.
No, there are guests that can get you. I mean, I'm sure if I had Bob Dylan on the show, I would be. I met him one time and I couldn't even talk.
Sure. I never met Dylan. Though. Seen him perform a lot. But my favorite Dylan album is Nashville Skyline. I love that album. And Nashville Skyline Rag, the first cut, was the theme song of my show in North Carolina.
That I did not know. By the way, Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash, there's about 8 or 9 songs that they did together that are not on that album.
Really?
Yeah.
Like to hear that.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's look it up and you'll find it.
I want to write that down. What's it?
I think you can get on Spotify or certainly it was one of the bootlegs where he released
Johnny Cash. Okay.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just fantastic.
I love Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash.
Of course.
You're authentic guy. That's what I look for in performances. Authenticity in anchor people on television, singers, authenticity. That you're not just. I saw about a month ago at the Beacon Theater, which we all know well in New York City. I saw Tom Jones. I bought a single ticket as soon as I knew who was going to be there. I'd seen him 2 other times. Tom Jones did 2 hours.
Mhm.
It was a big screen behind him with all kinds of very expensive, well-staged show. And sometimes his face, he did not turn in one false moment.
Yeah,
He
no,
was-
he's incredible.
And-
I played the Beacon a couple of times with Jerry.
Yeah.
Tom Jones, by the way, he's growing still leaps and bounds at his age. He just recorded a couple of Dylan songs, Leonard Cohen song. He did a song by Dylan called "Not Dark Yet."
Yes.
And
His new album, to interrupt, is called Tom Jones, Surrounded by Time. I would say about 60% of the 2-hour show was from that album. The album is brilliant.
absolutely brilliant, and it's stuff about life, being older, and
Yep.
accepting where he's at. It's quite the
Right. I recommend that Tom Jones Surrounded by Time album unequivocally. There's a
By the
couple
way, Van Morrison and Tom Jones did a song together.
pop
called,
star, the pop
what?
star.
Yeah, Van Morrison and Tom Jones did a song, "No Time to Cry."
Oh.
Something about crying. It's an incredible song the two of them did together. So you'll appreciate that.
So when you're
Yes.
talking about authenticity, I'm curious, when you were on Comedy Tonight, I heard you mention that you interviewed around 2,000 comedians. Is that same rule of thumb, what you were
No,
looking for
we
comedians?
auditioned. We
Audition.
auditioned. Richard Baker and I personally auditioned around 1,500 comedians, and we booked, I think, 370. Played
Okay.
the show. Played the show.
So was it that same thing? Like, what were you looking for with comedians?
That's a good question. And what we were looking for, when we started out Comedy Tonight, Richard, I, and generally our Barbara White, our assistant, we go to a comedy club. Sometimes we go to 2 comedy clubs. We saw a lot at Catch, right? Saw Jerry one night at Catch.
Catch a Rising Star.
Anyway, what we were looking for was a chunk. Like, let's just take a person doing a bit about the wristwatch, whatever. And then Richard, we'd write down wristwatch bit. And then we compare notes, or we elbow each other. We like that. And then so we liked the performance, and maybe the person had 2 chunks. Then we'd get in touch with them and invite them to do the show. But the caveat was, Richard was extremely brilliant producer and a very good technical producer. We had to control the time on the show. So, say the wristwatch bit might have been, say, 2 minutes and 40 seconds. First, we'd have them do the bit. We time the bit, like sitting in front of us. And then if it were a little too long, like, say, 3 minutes and 15 seconds, we'd say, "Can you cut 15 seconds?" And they hated that. But invariably, the cuts really did not affect the material. So but I think notably in the world of comedy, when we first started auditioning acts, we'd be there for laughing so much. By the time midway through, it was a clinical thing.
Right.
Rarely laugh. And why is that? It just, all 3 of us stopped laughing. I've never understood why. That's funny, but it was not funny in a way that made us laugh.
I guess it's almost a doctor becoming impervious to seeing blood, after a while, and a surgeon, it becomes an everyday thing. I always found, and tell me if you found this with comedians, because you've worked with all kinds of people in show business. I always found them incredibly easy to work with. People go, comedians are neurotic and this and that, but they seem to show up. They're on time. They deliver. They don't give you a neurotic.
No, you have to give a comedian a lot of rein. Meaning, if you're a really controlling host, where a lot is about you, and you got to keep yourself in the interview, then it can be a little difficult. If you, like, for example, Robin Williams, one time, I think I asked one question, and then he's going. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, "Wait, I have to ask more. I'm not doing enough," but it just that's the one thing I learned. Like Pat Cooper, God may he rest in peace, one of my favorite comedians who died this year.
About a month and a half ago.
First time Pat was on the show. Boggs, what are you doing here? What? How do you have a show? What? And I'm sort of listening to him, and that's when I learned that I don't have to even respond. Just keep talking to me, Pat. This is funny. You know?
I was just with I had breakfast with Shecky Green and Pete Barbuti in Vegas a couple of weeks ago.
Fabulous. Wow.
And it was 3 days after Pat had passed on. And Shecky Green's 97, and he's great. And Pete, I have a show I'm going to do with Pete next year. He's 90. I said, Pete, next year, he goes, if I'm still alive, I'll be there.
That's cool. Good man. Shecky Green, I saw Shecky Green when I was in Chicago with Patchen and Tarsus. We did a show that ran for 9 months in Chicago at the Happy Medium Theater. And every week a different act would come in, the Mr. Kelly's, owned by the same people.
Famous nightclub, Mr. Kelly's.
Yes, Mr. Kelly's nightclub was like the Copa of the Midwest. So many, many acts. And I saw Shecky Green there headlining, not opening, headlining. Boy, he was really good. It's the only time I ever saw his work. And but Shecky Green is, by the way, when my last marriage broke up, and people would say to me, you looking for another? Yes, of course I'd like to have another girlfriend. I'd like to have another relationship. What are you looking for? Well, 3 things. What are they? Well, I like a nice body, a girl with a fulsome body. Somebody who's basically a nice person, easy to get along with, and they have to know who Shecky Green is.
Right. That's hysterical. You know, there's
and they got to connect with me. I can't be like on a different planet.
Sure. You know, you did the hand thing. There's an old joke about that where a guy goes, I want to meet a girl with,
I mean, I don't.
and the guy goes, arthritis? Yeah. That's a great old, you know, you mentioned girls, you mentioned marriage. You've been married 4 times.
4 times. That's it. You know, it's like a storage unit. You collect a lot of things during the course of a long life. You know, I got a big 8 in front of my age now. So yeah, yes, I have. The first one was a very young college marriage. Actually, was in Knowles. I learned something from each of them. As a matter of fact, Leslie Bennett's, my second wife, to this day is one of my lifelong friends. The marriage did not work, but we have been intensely close, personal, supportive friends since we met, 1969. Yeah. So marriage, Mark Mead, the anthropologist, put it beautifully. He said, you know, a marriage should be able to be renewed every 5 years. And if it isn't what you thought it should be, then the contract can be broken, but you can have another form of that relationship. And so I stand for, okay, marriages break up most part. It's a great deal of acrimony, but every once in a while, the original person who meant a lot to you, but with whom you did not gel living together. Now I think it's way more easy. You can live with a man and woman can live together. They can see what life is like in a living space.
Well, Isaac Bashevis Singer, I don't know if you ever interviewed him, but he felt that you have your early wife, have your family, your kids with this person, and then you get rid of her and you get somebody else later in life. My wife always hated that story. You know, interesting about an annulment. When the church annuls a marriage, what does that mean? It didn't have. It makes me think like, you know, The Godfather, where Tom is sitting talking to the senator with the dead girl behind him, going, "It never happened."
Doesn't have to be the church. You can get a marriage annulled that is not in a religious way, not in a religious way. For example, Renee Zellweger briefly married. What's the name of that country singer? The guy who always wears the hats.
And a lot of tattoos, I think. Yeah, I don't remember.
Marriage was annulled within a couple months of it, as was mine. So, but anyway, I don't know. I think that ex post fact. I don't. You know, to me, someone asked me just today in an interview, "Would I get married again?" You know what I said? I said I would live with a woman. I'd have wonderful time with a woman, but I don't think I need the state contract in there. I don't think I need to have the state, meaning the state of New York where I live, involved in my life. And as Sinatra once said on stage, and that's the dullest speech you're going to hear from me today.
Oh, yeah, that's great. So love is lovelier the second time around. So I'm married 33 years. Lowell is married
13.
12, 13?
Yep.
13 years. So what do we need to do to keep this thing going?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you. I'm asking you since I'm sure, what should we not do?
You have asked me what I would say, keep your body out of sight after a certain age, keep the candles on. My favorite marriage story is when somebody asks the brilliant Carl Reiner, what is this, who was married to Adele for many, many years.
Many
long,
years.
happy marriage, and every time she performed, Carl would be there night after she was singing. Someone asked Carl Reiner, Carl, what is the secret to a long, happy marriage? And Carl says, well, I do have a long, happy marriage, but with that question, I have to defer to my friend Mel Brooks, who says, the secret of a long marriage is finding somebody who can stand you.
Right.
That's all I got.
And Mel was married a long time too. And I went to see Adele perform. Carl's Estelle in LA. Mel Brooks was there and Carl was there. And all these friends of theirs just would come out and watch her sing in a little club.
I know. I tell you, those guys, and let's put in Norman Lear. They're really in a class by themselves. One night, I was privileged to have dinner. I believe it was at Norman Lear's house, and Carl Reiner was there with his wife. Man, I wasn't inhibited as much. I just breathing in the air with these guys, pioneering men in the world of comedy.
So I just recently, not too long ago, George Shapiro, Jerry Seinfeld's manager and the great from Shapiro West, passed on, and they had a memorial at Paramount. And first, Mel Brooks goes up. He's 97 years old. He walks up on stage, and he was hysterical. He comes down. Dick Van Dyke goes up right after him. He's 98 years old, 97. He comes down, goes up after him. Norman Lear is 100 years old, up on stage talking, and then Jerry closed the event. So that was really quite extraordinary to see those three guys one after another, still viable and talking and climbing up on stage, all better than 96, 7 years old, and Norman 100.
Absolutely love it. To me, I love hearing that. That's really good. Look, I just turned 82. That's a lot of life. And what I want to do is keep going, because I want to keep going, not because I want to prove anything, but because I have a gift, I have a talent, I can do something. I'm essentially a writer now, and I want to try to set a good example as long as I can. I want to try to set a good example. I think diet, exercise, humor, enormously important.
Before we get to your book, and we want to get to it, I want to hear about, because I don't want to sound like Billy Crystal. You look marvelous. 82 years old. It's terrific. You have tremendous energy. Your head is intact. You pulling out stories.
My head has never been intact, but maybe it's the lighting. Let's see. That was that said. Oh, he's 82. All right, go ahead.
So what is if you have a couple? You said exercise. Do you exercise? Do you eat? Everything.
Having read your book, I know the importance to you of keeping your weight and controlling your weight and stuff like that. I basically swim 4 or 5 days a week.
Wow.
My phone, I've got that little heart thing. I try to hit 6,000 steps if I can. Meaning if I have to, I'll park 3 blocks away from where I have to go. So my diet is essentially the Mediterranean diet. I don't eat fried food. I try to avoid eating a lot of cheese, particularly a lot of cheese. I love cheese, but the Mediterranean diet, exercise, and then try to find a way to really reduce stress. I had a yoga class many years ago, and I didn't like yoga. I love exercise. I also lift weights. I do push-ups and chin-ups, but in the yoga class, I learned diaphragmatic breathing, and I can really calm down with a couple of deep breaths. And so I think that being aware of the ravages that continued stress can take. I mean, we all have stress. I can't find my keys. What's happening?
Sure.
But I had an hour of a certain amount of stress just trying to get the technical thing right. But then it went away, and now we're having a good time. So that's basically what I would say. I believe watching your weight is very important. I'm within, although I have more fat on my body, I'm within 8 pounds of my high school graduation weight.
Right.
When my body was different, at age 17, trimmer, tighter, and stuff like that. But keeping your weight at a reasonable point. The older you get, your metabolism.
You might say you were within 8 pounds of when you were dean of the school.
Oh,
So
I was like an Adonis as the dean. The other guy was had to make up for it.
quite incredible. Yeah. And so those are good lessons. By the way, when we let the people know before we came on, there was a technical glitch. It took an hour to fix it. And I was very aware that you did not lose focus on it. You stayed calm about it. Lowell was calm about it. I don't seem to have that ability, maybe because
I wasn't
really, you never went, hey, I can't do this. I'm old. I can't do this. Is crazy.
I lost my erection. That's the only thing I lost. No, I was tense, but I was annoyed. But there's this stuff that just. I think what I'm trying to work on right now is bringing myself back in the moment. You mentioned Ram Dass is one of my guests who wrote the great book "Be Here Now." One of the great difficult challenges of life is truly being in the moment and not.
Right.
And that's actually why I like performing. To me, this whole interview is like a performance, right? I'm totally focused on what you guys are doing. There's not a lot of extraneous thoughts going through my mind. Now, when we sign off, it will become filled with stuff like that. But I have 6 different stage shows that I do, like on cruise ships. I haven't done them for a couple of years. I started out Confessions of a Talk Show Host. I tell stories like the Miles Davis stories in there. And I do one on Sinatra, one on the Rat Pack, one on Fun on the Food Network, another whole show about singers I've interviewed with the interviews and clips of singers singing. And before every one of those shows, I don't get nervous much before going on. I worry about the technical screwing things up. But I'm not a guy anymore who's off stage. Is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? I used to go through that. Now I just try to put myself forward and have faith when I get it. You know what this is like, Mark, without question.
Sure.
Have faith that when you hit your mark, it's going to be there. Correct?
Yeah. And I work alone. So in my contract, I tell them the technical in advance, what kind of sound system they need, what kind of microphone we need, extra batteries for a backup microphone, because otherwise you can go to a place and they go, microphone, what do you need a microphone for? It's only 600 people here. They can hear you. So so let's chat about the book, okay? Unless you don't want to.
I have a few moments.
Do you?
Okay. Oh, wait.
Just show people.
You mean this. Oh, no.
Lowell has it right there too.
Mark, where's your book?
Thank you.
So first,
The Wonder Dog Returns as told to Bill Boggs. That's a full title.
So this isn't new to you. You wrote a book in 1980.
First book I wrote in 80 was called At First Sight. I was intensely in love with a woman, and she was in Europe. I was my first years of Midday. And I had this feeling, I had this idea of, I'm not going to go into the whole of a story that was inspired by our love story. Not the whole story of it, because a love story just started. And I thought, if I could write a book, a novel, and get in advance, I'll rent a house out in the Hamptons, 1978, when I thought this. I'll rent a house, no, 77. I'll rent a house out in the Hamptons and she'll come for the summer. So highly motivated by love, I sat down and wrote out about 30 pages by hand of the idea, and it went to Grosset and Dunlap, and they liked it. Plus, I was also on TV at the time, so highly promotable.
Sure.
And I got a $30,000 advance, wrote the book. The book came out, and I rented a house, and she came over for the summer. I really believe in resolving to do something and then doing it. But it's only about you and your effort to do it. It's not about other people.
That's an incredible story, how you made this, made this happen, this idea?
Out
And
of
let's let the people know who that was. That was Sophia Loren, right?
no, but close.
Close.
Closest I could tell you what this woman looked like was Anita Ekberg.
Wow.
We are talking major and highly intelligent.
Beautiful girl.
Woman now has a PhD. So this woman had it all. But
What,
unfortunately, I do not have this woman. But it didn't work out.
Anita Ekberg, was she in the Dean Martin movies?
She was in 4 for Texas, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. She was a stunning, stunning, beautiful woman. So you wrote that book and
Yeah, I did. Years
then
later, Renee Zellweger actually optioned it 19 years later. She was my neighbor, and she came to see my Confessions of a Talk Show hosting. Renee was great. I love Renee Zellweger. Wonderful woman. If I had
wonderful actress.
everybody, if I had a daughter, I would like her to be like Renee. Wonderful woman. And I was interested in her work. She was interested in mine. I was married at the time. She's involved. So there was none of that. But she was kind enough to come and see my off-Broadway show, which is called Talk Show Confidential, just a talk show host. And she comes, she says, "This is great. This could be a movie, all these stories of her life." And I said, "Oh, I'm not about to write a script." And then she says, I said, "But you know what? If you want to read something, I wrote this book that really gets into it." So I gave her a copy of At First Sight. And she comes back 3 days later. She says, "Wow, this is a sexy book." And she optioned the book and the rights to my show for a movie, but nothing happened. But
Right.
okay.
I've had that too, where they option.
The gods of show business. All those years later.
So then you wrote Adventures of Spike the Wonder Dog, and then now the new book is a sequel. Can you explain to the audience the perspective in the book, that it's from a dog's perspective, and how did you come up with that?
Well, it just happened as I started. I wanted to write a story about a dog and his master, who's a TV host, who come to New York in today's world. Like I went to New York in '75, and the dog, the master, become big stars. Their television and social media. So I just had that idea. I patterned the initial part of the book about my career in North Carolina doing Southern exposure, where I had a dog called Spike the Dog. Okay. That dog got tremendous fan mail. He's a very funny dog. And if you go to Bill Boggs TV on YouTube, you can actually see some of the original Spike films that I shot.
You made like a silent movie. You made like a silent movie with the dog.
I made a silent movie with Spike.
And by the way, I just want to tell you, you did some falls in that movie that were incredible.
Thank you. Well,
how did you know how to fall like that without hurting yourself?
Playing football, playing touch football, tackle on the school and on grass in the playground where I grew up.
It was great. It was a great little movie, like 3 minutes.
You have to fall relaxed. You have to fall relaxed. So anyway, so the thought was this: what if Spike hadn't gotten killed? Because the dog got killed right before I came to New York, and went to New York, was a guy like me in today's time, and became a big star, and would be able to. This is what makes it happen. Observe human beings. Like this dog would look at me, and I was like, he's thinking. This dog is thinking about something. Observe human beings as a voice outside of the human universe and comment on it. And be funny as an observational comedian. One reviewer said, "This dog, Spike the Wonder Dog, is the funniest dog who's ever appeared in because Spike narrates the story." So the first story is a series of his adventures, and he gets kidnapped, and he's involved. He has to fight for his life in a dog fighting ring. And eventually the guy who kidnaps him at the end of the first story gets arrested and thrown in jail. The sequel, I see this as a trilogy. Just so you know, my goal is to sell this material as a adult cartoon, like for Netflix prime time. That is my goal. I'll be looking for voice actors once the strike is over and we make a deal on it. So the sequel picks up where the first book left off. You don't have to have read the first book. It explains what's going on in post-pandemic world. So what we have really is basically Spike observing human foibles, our celebrity obsessions, the things that are going on in our culture. And I populate it with all kinds of inventions. And there's a book has a complete raunchy side to it. But
Mhm.
somehow, I don't know why, I have the ability to write funny, raunchy material. There's a lot of that in it. And so you're following, the book is designed, look, I'm going to cut to the chase. I sat down to write a book, and the voice of the dog came through me, meaning a voice I had never comedically written in or spoken in my life. A new thing was happening at the computer. That's why I tell writers, you got to sit down and see what happens. As soon as that happened, I thought, my God, this works. And I just kept going and going and going. My entire goal with this book, and I'll say this to anybody, I'll challenge anybody, get the book. I guarantee you're going to laugh.
Mhm.
I just wrote it, and what's totally different than what you do, Mark, as I'm writing the book, I'm thinking, oh, this is funny. This works that way. I'm editing. But unlike stand-up, I don't know if I'm correct until somebody reads it. You know,
Right.
so I
We
had
know right away.
Keith
You don't,
Richard
it takes a while, right?
yeah, Richard Baker being one of them. And I sent Richard, for example, who was a very good judge of comedy, manages Tim, managed Drew Carey, with whom we did Comedy Tonight. What do you think? Tell me the truth. I have another friend, Diana Lewis, who worked, let's see, she was a producer of Letterman. Prior to that, she was on the Comedy Channel, and she'll be honest. So I sent them the book, the first book, and then the second book. And they said, this is funny. And they said, Bill, funny is money. This is going to work. So it's not that I'm bragging. I'm just telling you the
Right.
process. So the book is designed to make people laugh. It's hard
Right.
for me to explain why it works. It just does. Spike is funny. And it's just, look, it's filled with crazy characters. You have Saul, the old Swede Silverman, who is pretending to be 100 years old because he thinks he can give away. He's a quintessential dirty old man. He's only 92, but he thinks that it's easier to score if they think you're 100. And there's an
Right.
invention in it. How's this for an invention?
The sex bit?
The sex bit.
I love the sex bit.
SEX. It's like the Fitbit for sex.
Right.
Woman wears it, and at the end of the intercourse and what they're doing, the guy gets a score. Tell me that somebody's not doing to invent the sex bit. And so that the sex bit is in there. There's really a lot of it. One of my funniest things in the book is Spike ends up saving some strippers whose strip club, Big Woody's strip club, is burning down, famous for the dance of the seven oils. The oils caught fire on stage. He saves them, and there's some video of it. And Spike ends up on the Saturday Night Live doing something. And Kate McKinnon is back on the show as a guest host, says, I'm in this movie, Florida Man, and the dog that they had bitten, it's about a dog that gets kidnapped, based on a true story. The dog that they cast bit Tim Allen on the first day of rehearsal, and he got thrown off. So they're looking for a new dog. So Spike goes into an audition. And this I use all of my experience going to auditions, and he's sitting around looking at the other dogs. He ends up getting the part. And so there's a whole section shot in Palm Beach about making of the movie Florida Man. And Florida Man is like every day I see, there's Florida Man rents a skywriter to draw a giant penis in the sky. Florida Man caught on camera licking doorbells. I mean, crazy stuff like that. So, and this is about a crazy Florida man who's obsessed with alligators, has them tattooed all over his body, who kidnaps a dog played by Spike to use him as bait to capture the world's, the Everglades' largest alligator. The cast includes Tim Allen and Lucy Arnaz as the owners of the dog, and Kate McKinnon and Jim Carrey. What a combo they would be together.
Yeah.
Comedically, I put them in the movie, and playing playing the Florida Man is Prince Harry, because his Netflix contract in the book requires him that one movie part a year, small part, that plays against type, where he's not like aristocracy. And he's the heavily tattooed Florida Man. But the only reason he takes the part is because the movie's shot in Palm Beach, and his wife can go shopping. So that's like one whole thing, and it's filled with adventure.
Tremendous.
Then there's Ted Williams' Frozen Head.
Oh, yeah. Right. Ted Williams is a great baseball player.
Yeah.
think he wanted to, thanks for bringing that up. He wanted to be frozen, but somehow they only froze his head.
Yeah.
So there's a whole thing, there's a huge amount about what's going on in society. So
Yeah.
there's this thing about Bud, that's the Spike's owner, and Spike, and I think in one of the cast of Florida Man, they're on this local show when all of a sudden, hot off the presses, wait, the identity of the original Q of QAnon has been discovered. So they have to stop the thing and they're ripping it off the wire to read. The identity of Q has been discovered as the frosted head of baseball great Ted Williams.
Wow.
Then about 10 minutes later, what happens is the head, once it was warmed in the sun and defrosted, was interviewed by Bob Costas. The head immediately expressed the desire to be reunited with his body, said he knew nothing about QAnon, and said the secret to good hitting is just plain hard work.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's just
So you would call Spike an optimist, wouldn't you?
yeah. Spike is basically an optimist. He's an observational comedian who's been compared to both Jerry and Carlin by critics, not me. Yeah, Spike is basically an optimist. He knows the power prevailing. I'm basically an optimist. And what's interesting when you write a novel, and I think you should do this someday, guys, that all the characters are in you in some bizarre, strange way.
Right. Right. I hear that coming out of you. Yeah, it's amazing.
Mike Reese, one of the creators of The Simpsons, was one of the people who was kind enough to read the book and give me a blurb. And of all the nice things that were said, I love this. He said, Bill Boggs must have spent a lifetime in entertainment to be able to craft this highly effective, scathing, satirical satire. It's a funny book. So that it has been a lifetime. As a book I couldn't have written when I was 40, 50, or even
Sure.
60 years old. I'm drawing upon a lifetime of experience. And like our friend Bill Maher, I'm really a person, who really tries to draw attention to ageism, right?
Mhm.
Like when I say, my God, I'm 82 years old, it's almost like I'm so afraid somebody hears that they would never use me. They won't read the book. They won't do this. They won't do that. Because it's one of the last bastions of discrimination, without question.
Right. I wrote a lot about ageism in my book in a way,
Yeah,
about
I
getting
know.
older.
Yeah.
And so let me ask you, you're a guy who spent your whole life around all these different people and interviewing people, and you got people putting a show together. Now you're sitting in a room by yourself, writing.
Yeah.
What's your
I like-
process?
Oh,
I know.
well-
I like it too. I love it.
Good.
I love it.
That's a good question. When I made the decision in 2016, my last show went off the air, which was a show called My Generation. It was produced by the AARP, and it had to do with my interviewing successful people, essentially about their lives and how they were successful. And what meant there's a lot of the clips from My Generation are on Bill Boggs TV. So the show got canceled after 5 seasons. And I thought, I'm 70, whatever years old. No one's running after me, Bill Boggs, to be on TV anymore. I've been chasing jobs and work all my life, like since Patrick and Tarsus, the comedy team. I'm just going to focus on writing. And
Mhm.
stood in my living room at the time, my girlfriend Jane. I said, Jane, from this point forward in my life, I'm a writer. I'm not a talk show host anymore. I'm a former talk show host, and I'm a writer. I get up in the morning, I think about that. I've written since that day when I made that resolution. I've written 2 Spike books. There'll be one more, God willing. Probably called End of the Tale will be that
Great
title.
name. Great name.
I kind of know. I don't know how it's going to end. I know how it's going to start. It's going to start. I like to start with a big scene, like The Godfather. So Spike Unleashed, the new book, which is just now out, starts at the Kardashian Day Parade in High Point, North Carolina. There's all kinds of dignitaries. I think I'm going to start the next book at an absolutely absurd destination wedding where
Mhm.
all of the guests have had to fly like halfway around the world to Fiji. They got jet lag, but they have to get off the plane and immediately go dance around on the beach like but some kind of a destination wedding. I think it'll be a very funny start for the book. And Spike will be like valid.
So you
So
know,
the process is literally just honest, just sitting down and doing it and editing, editing, editing.
mhm,
Constantly going back over the material like you do it, like any comedian.
absolutely. I'll write a story and I'll go over it 15, 20 times at least. And in fact, there's a story I've been working on for the last 5, 6 days. I'm thinking I just got to rewrite the whole thing completely, and it doesn't happen that much, but that's what it takes.
Well, if anybody would come back to me and say the best advice you said was just keep editing, because at this stage, what Bill Boggs wants to do is that be funny, write, and help people. So you just got to get it down. Nothing happens until you sit down and see what comes out. You must resolve yourself. You're going to do it.
Fantastic.
Do you set out certain hours, or do you just kind of write and then you get lost in it? And
Well, on the Spike books, I generally wrote them in the afternoon. I get some exercise in the morning. The the stuff of life, and then I'd say I'll start writing at 1:30, quarter to 2. So before writing, would lie down in bed, in my bed, and just try not to be on the phone, meaning texting, and just kind of rest. And I always drank, in those days, a Runa energy drink with high caffeine, but not like chemicals. Now I use a Celsius drink, which is a lot of caffeine, but it's not chemicals. It's coming from tea leaves. And have that. It's just kind of feel my energy coming up, then just walk around, go sit down at the desk. And then I'd look at Bill Boggs TV comments that people would make. And people, every once in a while, somebody calls me an asshole, or this guy doesn't know what he's, that would get me all juiced up.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd go away from that. I'd bring up what I wrote, and then I'd go through everything that I wrote yesterday, the day before,
Mm-hmm.
edit it again, even though I had edited it a couple of times. Everything, cutting, cutting, cutting.
Wow. Can
Punching.
you write? Can you write with other people around?
No, remember I mentioned Leslie Bennett. She was a New York Times writer back in the days of typewriters in the newsrooms. She can write. She can fireworks could be going off in the house, and she got great. No, I need the focus. And I will say one thing about technique that when I mentioned before, one of the things I like about the fact that you've actually given me all this time to talk, to blab on like this, is that I can now reference things that I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So when I said that my parents gave me a radio when I was 4 years old, and I wanted to be like the men on the radio, when I was talking about listening to radio, I'm blessed to be old enough to have lived through the very end of the golden age of radio. And what was
Mm-hmm.
that? That was actual drama shows on the radio, like Mr. Keen, Tracer of Lost Persons, action shows like Sky King, comedy shows, sitcoms on the radio, right? The process of being a little boy, right, listening to that radio at night with my eyes closed, enabled me to develop the capacity to image in. Radio was called, this is really a forgotten term, radio was called the theater of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now that makes sense in that context. So when I first started to write that first book, At First Sight, it was like I see it and then I write it. So my books, Spike Unleashed, The Adventures of Spike the Wonder Dog, very visual, very visual. That's why I think we're going to sell them as a cartoon, because you see it as it's happening. I see it as it's happening as I write it. That doesn't mean, sometimes I see the funny stuff, but I see the characters. Like one character, I mentioned Saul, the old sweet Silverman, who was this quintessential dirty old man. And they were involved in a reality show with Spike and his master have to get him a date for something. I don't want to go into that. But the guy is so worried about ED, right, erectile dysfunction, that he buys this new right up hot off the market product. Now, this is another invention in the book. It's called the V Plus watch.
Mm-hmm.
And a collaboration between Apple and Viagra. And it's for really old guys. And it's a watch that has two little carburetors in it that injects extra high doses of Viagra at time intervals. So he's got the watch on, and all of a sudden I think, but the one side effect of the V Plus watches can be you always have those side effects, dizziness, heart valve. One side effect is rigidness of the limbs can result from the B plus. So the first thing that happens is his arm flies up like this and the leg, and I just see it and I write it. A lot of times it's hard to describe visual stuff.
Sure.
You just have to read it.
When I write sometimes, I'm surprised what has just come out of me.
Yes. Great feeling, isn't it?
It's unbelievable. It's an extraordinary feeling. I wrote a line yesterday and I said, wow, where did that come from? It almost works to encourage you to go on. I was with Wayne Fetterman last night, who did your show, and we were talking about old radio shows. And one of our favorites was Al Jolson had a radio show for 2 years.
Never heard the Jolson show. Yeah. Wow.
You can get it on eBay. It's on MP3 and it's a disc you put in your player.
Really?
Absolutely phenomenal. He had the biggest guests in the world on his show with him. He sang every single show, and it only lasted for 2 years. And I think the show was only about a half hour, but quite extraordinary old radio show.
Yeah, I think that in an interview once with the now disgraced Bill Cosby, what happened there is awful, but it's still some wisdom. And I was interviewing him once, and he was explaining how he used to listen to radio as a little boy, and radio was the theater of the mind. And he said, I think that any parent should constantly be reading to their children. Let the children just sit there with their eyes closed and read to them so that they can develop an interior imagination. Radio is pretty much forgotten. It formed me creatively, without question.
Sure. By the way, when we were coming up in comedy, Bill Cosby was, to many of us, the greatest stand-up comedian that ever lived.
He was a breakthrough comedian, without question.
And you're right. That was the greatest shock to me. It was because here's a guy who spent his life talking about raising children, his family, and his wife, and he goes so far off the deep end with all that information that he had. Which proves that intelligence is not the key to a successful life.
No, I mean, in his case, you're dealing with perverted obsession. I mean, it's 2 words would apply there, I'm from Philadelphia. He's from Philadelphia. He was at Temple University in Philadelphia. After he was in the Navy, one of the star players from my high school football team went to Temple and was on the same team with Cosby. And so I knew Bill. Philadelphia is a tight town. People in Philadelphia in show business, like Sylvester Stallone went to my high school, and I've only been with him a couple times. Every time we see each other, it's a big hug. We're from Philadelphia.
Sure.
Robert Rydell, who died last year, great singer. I got close with him. Frankie Avalon, Fabian. The Philadelphia people really stick together. So Cosby really helped me in my career.
Sure.
And even by my voice, as I say this, how horrified I was to hear.
Same here. Believe me. And he was helpful to me too, but we knew nothing about any of this stuff. By the way, when you talk about Philadelphia, when I hear you talk, I absolutely hear David Brenner.
Oh, well, he had one of the worst Philadelphia accents.
And you're not too far behind him. I'm telling you, I hear Philly.
Not good. Not good.
But I see your emotions a little like Brenner too. It's is this just a Philly thing?
Yes, there are all manner. Listen, I could hook you up with a guy sometime if he can figure out how to do this. Talk to him for 10 minutes. That would be like the worst Philadelphia accent you've ever heard. It's a Kensington, Philadelphia accent. The guy is there are all manners of it. Now, my mother, father, and I, and my friends did not have the severe Philadelphia accent of like Chris Matthews. Formerly from CNBC, had a Philadelphia accent. I thought I overcame, but apparently I've got something else to work on, my friends.
There you go. No, I could hear it a little bit, and a little of your movements, a little Brenner, but I love Brenner. So
David Brenner. I'd like to tell you a David Brenner story. Okay,
love it.
David and I knew each other a long time. And David was like Cosby. Very helpful to me. One time when I had that first book, At First Sight, came out, David got me on the Mike Douglas show. Douglas was doing the show on the West Coast. And very, 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 very good. Wonderful relationship. So the 92nd Street Y, probably about 8 years ago. I'll tell you when. 11 years ago. The 92nd Street Y wanted me to do some kind of a program, so I asked if I could interview David Brenner. They liked that. We set it up for Sunday night, and the video of this is on Bill Boggs TV on YouTube, right? Which I like people to go to, subscribe, it's free. So you can see the whole thing. So I did the interview. He really liked it. Kind of reconnected with him and his wife at the time. And a couple months, but he wasn't well. I could tell he wasn't doing well. A couple months later, I had a table at Rayo's. The people who had invited me at the last minute, they backed out. They said, no, you go to Rayo's. So the day before, I said, I want to take David Brenner to Rayo's, which is a small, highly exclusive Italian restaurant in East Harlem in New York. Very difficult to get into Rayo's, R-A-O''S. So we go. He's happy to go. He shows up. He's a cane. Tells me what his physical problems are. And then the pathos of it. He really felt he had been forgotten. You know, he did the Tonight Show, as a host more than
anybody in history, I think.
And I sat there with him, with my girlfriend Jane and his wife, and I practically had tears in my eyes. I mean, David Brenner, I have a chill now thinking of it. I said, David, you're David Brenner. I said, you have a legacy that you were one of the founders of Observation. Yes, but no one remembers. And it's the last time he ever went out at night. And 2 months later, he was dead. But, I feel awful telling that story. What can we learn from that? There are those of us in the business who are not remembered as currently as they should be. But what can we learn from David feeling that way? Anyway, it was a real pathos. And we're talking about, and what was nice was, I'll try to end on a good note, the story, that half the people in the restaurant came over to the table to say hello to him. And by the time he left, it was a little bit pumped up. But anyway.
Yeah, no, he was incredible. And he actually, in a strange way, I continued on being a comedian because of one night. I was at Catch a Rising Star in New York, and we were all struggling, not making any money. David Brenner was already a big star. He comes walking in with a full-length fur coat.
Yeah, he had that fur coat.
Fur coat. And I saw this and I go, I'm in the right business. I'm going to, look what this guy's wearing from telling jokes. I'm not going anywhere.
Isn't that story in your book?
I did not have that, and I've reminded Brenner about it a few times. He goes, that fur coat got so much play and people just loved that coat. Yeah. It was extraordinary.
I've always been suspicious of men in long fur coats, but not him.
Oh, this was top to bottom, from the neck down, right to his feet. I know, right to his feet. It was the longest fur coat I've ever seen in my life. There must have been 6,000 animals in there. So let me ask you, when Mickey Mantle, when these guys played baseball, they got $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. Now these players are getting $100 million. When you were a talk show host, and what do you think about this? What were you earning as a talk show host in New York in Midday?
I started in 75. I think I was making $75,000. Right. Came up from
a year.
I came up from High Point. No, I think it was less, because I was making $12,000 a year in High Point doing a show. It was probably like 50. Okay. And it went up to 75, 78. And then by the time, so I did not make what you would call the big bucks, but I ground out money other ways. A Comedy Tonight syndicated show. I hosted events. I did a game show for CB. I did a lot of stuff to try to make money. I always worked hard. And I like the concept of working hard. You need to make money. You have to work for it. Then I went to Philadelphia, and it was more doing a local show in Philadelphia than I'd been making on Midday. But where I really made the money The most money I ever made was as executive producer of the Morton Downey Jr. show, which was 175, and then I got a bonus. I mean, that's a lot of anybody listening to this right now, you could be working hard in the mall or something like that, wherever you're working. It was a lot. So I've never been like a really wealthy guy. I've saved, I've worked hard, I've invested in the stock market based primarily on stuff I hear on see, but I do. And I bought Uber stock, not a lot. It's doing very well. And yeah,
So what
so
do you think of these guys making millions and, 20, 30, $40 million?
I know that. I did a game show for CBS while hosting Midday where I made some money. But early on, I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. I wrote inside my head the 5 category. That was my goal in my career. And I knew that but maybe the Philadelphia accent could have derailed me here, possibly. If I tried, I could have become, I think, a pretty successful game show host,
Mhm.
It's
Sure.
possible that the accent or the tinges of the accent could have derailed me, but
I never thought about the accent when I saw you on Midday Live or any of those
it was much
shows.
worse then. It was worse then.
Wow. By the way, did you know the other guys? Did you know Merv and Mike Douglas? By the way, do you know how Mike was canceled? Do you know that story?
You tell me how he was canceled, and I'll tell you a Mike Douglas story.
So
About how
Mike Douglas wrote a book,
Yeah.
autobiography. So one day he goes to work to the set, and it's not there. And the grip or something there says, "What are you doing here?" He goes, "What do you mean? What am I doing here? We have a show to do." He goes, "You were canceled." They never called him. He said they never called him and let him know that he
I
was finished.
I don't believe that. I don't
He
believe
wrote
it.
he wrote it in a book. Do you think he would make that up? A story of that
You're
magnitude?
probably right. You're probably right. It's starting
It's so insane a story. I can't imagine he would make it up.
I guess you're right there. And the Mike Douglas is an example of a forgotten guy. You mentioned
Yes. And
David.
and like you, he had everyone on. John and Yoko
Yeah.
Week.
A wonderful show. Producer. He was a heavily produced performer. You had Roger Ailes, say what you will about Fox TV, a brilliant television producer, and Woody Frazier produced the show, but he was so much on cue cards. I went down there. So, I was working. His show was in the basement of KYW. I was on the second floor with McLean and Company, hosted by Bob McLean. Every once in a while, we go down, like we wanted to see John and Yoko. Once I went down, and the show was over, and they're cleaning up, and I thought, I'm going to look at some of the cue cards, see what cue cards there.
Sure.
One card had the word "really" question mark on it. Really?
Oh God.
But here's a story, and this is 100% true. So Mike Douglas was a kind of a handsome, ruddy complected Irishman, brown hair. And when we started the show that replaced Tom Snyder, a host from Canada was brought down from Canada with his wife and 2 children named Bob McLean. He had been an interviewer in Canada. The guy was a very relaxed interviewer. We've talked about him before. He gets hired, and we get the show on during a month or so that the Mike Douglas show at the same station is on hiatus. So Mike Douglas comes strolling in to the station. Bob McLean, new host of the little local McLean and Company show that I'm involved with, looks up and he sees a younger version of himself, an Irish guy, brown hair, ruddy complexion, smiling. And he doesn't like the fact that Westinghouse has a younger host in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff starts to happen where we can't, if the Mike Douglas show wants a guest, like we had Joey Bishop on our booking board, they came up and they took Joey Bishop, and so they started like bigfooting us, and that was in summer. Now, or that was in whenever it was, about several months go by, and it's now Christmas time. A snowy day. It's December 23rd, snowy day. And we are all of the staff of McLean and Company are opening the gifts for each other, and and Bob McLean gets a call to come up to the general manager's office. He thinks he's going to get his bonus. He comes back in about 10 minutes, pale white. What's wrong? Bob, what? They fired me. What?
Mm.
Now ratings were good. There was no indication that this man should have been fired. What? Yeah, I have to clean out the desk and go home.
Mm.
So in the bag that he brought the gifts with, his stuff goes in, and then Debbie Miller and Debbie would go on to be a major agent at the William Morris. We walk McLean outside. It's snowing, December 23rd. Tears in our eyes. We hug Bob McLean and watch him walk off in the snow with his 2 bags, go home and tell his wife that
Wow.
he's
Wow.
found out a week later that Mike Douglas had him fired for no cause. He just didn't want him in the station. No cause. But as we watched Bob McLean walk away, I turned to Debbie Miller and I said, what the hell kind of business are we getting involved in here? What? And that was a big warning to me.
Sure. How did they let you know that your show was not going to continue?
Well, Midday, after 13 years, I was ready to leave, but that is no BS. You know, they do the same thing 13 years, like off and on. Like I was ready to leave. I think they just told us they weren't renewing the show. The show was going to go off in 2 months, and I had a severance. I don't know, whatever it was for every year I've been there. Wasn't a lot. And I walked down 67th Street breathing new air. I thought, this is great. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I'm glad to go on to do something else. And I've always held that. But what was interesting was being a public person, of not being on the show all the time like this. People on the street, the show got, are you okay?
Yeah.
Actually thought like physically upset. And I have to tell them, no, I was really ready to leave. A lot of times I think they didn't believe me, but I was.
Good. Good. Well, first of all, aside from all this, you really know how to tell a story.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you here. And, when you talk about your success, one of the things that I feel is you have something that people can't invent. Is you have this real likability. And when I would watch you and even here, there's something that you just trust that you're an okay guy, much more so than some of these guys have these days. I feel a little nervous when I watch some of these shows going on. So political, less entertaining than anything you ever did. And
well, you're very kind. You're very kind. Listen, I don't know if we're wrapping up or not, but this has been an enormously pleasant experience for me. I guess everybody likes to talk about themselves. For whatever reason, you two have enabled me. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know how long I would be on. I just knew I was looking forward to it. By the way, the final plug, this is the large print version of the book.
Wow.
You're having eye problems. We got that for you, right?
I want to ask you 2 more questions about the book.
Yeah, sure.
When I went in to sell my book, when I went into a publisher, we had the meeting. They asked me 2 questions. They said, why did you write the book and why should people read this book?
I wrote it because I wanted to write it, and I think they should read it to entertain themselves for the same reason that they would go to a comedy show, to laugh. That's the reason I wrote the book, make people laugh.
And was it important to you to write this book?
Crucial. Absolutely crucial.
What does that mean?
Well, I just felt that I wanted my career to continue. And the best way to continue my career, I've always been an ambitious guy. There's nothing wrong with being ambitious. You don't step on people necessarily, but I wanted my career to continue. And I thought that I'm not going to be on television anymore, or I'm going to look foolish trying to get jobs at whatever age 74, whatever I was. Something like that. I want to write. I have always been a writer. I've already written 2 other books, 1 novel, 1 self-help book. And I thought, if I do this, I'm still using whatever you want to call it, talent or gift I have, And I'm still in the game, like that Sondheim song. There's a game, I'm going to play. I'm still in the
Hmm.
game. And if and when the day, it's like Tom Jones. He said, I'm here as long as I can do this, or as a lot of acts will say, as long as I can get up there and the people come and see me. But what I had to, I'm in the process of doing this, redefine myself. So it's not a case of, how come Bill Boggs is writing books? Isn't he a talk show host? I've never liked that cubbyhole thing.
Hmm.
Stage shows, an executive producer. I've read books. That's it.
That's nice. It's encouraging to me because, I started writing, seriously a couple of years ago. And I'm sitting here wondering, I wonder what's going to come out of me like came out of Bill.
Well, I think if you get some kind of a thing that exists in the world of comedy
Hmm.
and somehow craft a novel that has a good, strong enough storyline, say, a likable character facing obstacles who grows as a result of them. Uh, you're writing your own milieu. I mean, all of my book is set in the world of television. Spike the
Right.
One Dog is a TV star. His master is a TV host. They're on a talk show like mine.
Hmm.
And so all of the stuff that happens in the world is David Brenner. All the stuff that happens in the world of television has really happened to me in
Right.
my career.
Well,
And
that's what
then,
Neil Simon said, right? What you know.
right, 100%. 100%.
And that's what Carl Reiner did on Dick Van Dyke's show. When the writers would come in, he'd go, "So what happened this weekend? What happened in your marriage this weekend? What did the kids do this weekend?" And they had the next week's episode.
That's great. That's real brains, though. That's real brains. Carl
Mhm.
Reiner.
One of the other books that you wrote was Got What It Takes.
Self-help book. I interviewed successful people about how they got successful. That was based on interviewing.
Yeah. So is there
And-
any common threads that you could highlight in terms of what you think were the most common repeated
Yeah.
ideas?
Be prepared to fail.
Mhm.
Be prepared to fail. One of the people in the book said, I don't remember which one. In this company, you probably won't get fired for making a mistake. You could get fired if you never make a mistake, because mistakes are the byproduct of risk. And if we don't have people taking risks, how are we going to innovate? So I think be willing to fail, because there are lessons in failure that can only be taught through failure, would be one of the common threads.
Mhm. I just want to ask you one quick thing about Tennessee Williams. I don't know what you remember about him, but arguably he's one of the greatest playwrights that ever lived. And you had him on your show. I mean, there aren't many interviews with Tennessee Williams around.
No, his agent at the time, a guy named Bill Barnes, family was from North Carolina, but Bill was in New York. And his family said, there's this guy coming up to New York from North Carolina who's had a very successful show, and you should look him up. And so I got to be friendly with Barnes, and his client was Tennessee Williams. And he said,
Uh-huh.
why don't you put Tennessee on the show? That was really nice.
You talk about an accent, Tennessee Williams, really, that voice of his. I had a thing with him once. I'll tell you, I'm such an idiot sometimes. So, Second Avenue, I'm standing at a newspaper stand. You remember those old newspaper stands where
Yeah.
I'm looking at, I don't know, the post or something. I see Tennessee Williams walk by, and I yell, "Hey, 10!" And he turns around and goes, "Who the is this guy?" I mean, he's just looking at some idiot kid and calling him 10, like I've been playing softball with him for the last 25 years, the greatest playwright. "Hey, 10." And he just gave me this New Orleans snicker and just rolled off, probably to get drunk, and it was an amazing moment. I never forgot it. And I wish I could have said to him, "I'm sorry. I'm a huge fan of yours. I mean, I don't know why I did this."
I'm glad we saved that tape. That's one of the first things ever put on Bill Boggs TV. There's a short version, but we just found the longer version.
Oh, I got to see that because I only saw like the 9-minute or whatever it was.
The longer version is now on Bill Boggs TV. Yeah.
How did these tapes stay okay all these years?
They were in my parents' basement. Whatever reason they stayed. Never in their cases.
We're going to let you go. This has been an incredible.
I hopefully I can put this whole thing on Bill Boggs TV. I have really enjoyed this, and I hope when I come to California in
You're going to
February,
give a call and we'll get together.
100%, 100%. I thank you very much. Get the book, folks. Spike on
It's
Reading.
upside down. It's upside down. Turn it around.
There you go.
There you go. So, Lowell, he has 2 quick questions for you.
Spike,
Beautiful.
Wonder Dog, little Spike. Go ahead.
It's going to
Very
take a
nice.
minute and a half, and
There
then
we
you'll
go.
be out.
Just one question, really. You've shared some advice throughout the discussion, but is there any advice that you would want to share with people that you wish someone had shared with you when you were younger?
Let's see. I think that David Brenner, said somebody to me, you can live life 2 ways. You can either take chances and go for it or be safe. When all is said and done, I want to be safe. I took chances and went for it. And that's what I say. Take a chance and go for it. Connect to what I just said a couple of minutes ago. Don't be afraid of failing. We're so used to like this mark, we have to do that mark. Just be prepared to fail. Have fun. Have a really good time. We're not here that long. Just enjoy yourself.
So I have a friend, his name is George Stanley. He's 97 years old, and he's a very good friend of mine. And he has a saying, and you seem to embody this. He goes, everybody dies, but not everybody lives. And you've lived an incredible life.
Thank you. Some people live to be 70 and they died when they were 38.
That's right. That's right. And you're just going gangbusters at 82.
I tell you, I'm really blessed. I know how blessed and fortunate I am. Without question, I don't take it for granted. I practice gratitude, pass it on. I am a lucky man. I'm a blessed person. All 3 of us, look at what we're able to do in our lives. We're able to be creative people, earn a living doing what we want to do. How many people in the world have that ability to cut out their own niche in life? So be grateful. Be grateful.
Well, Bill Boggs, I thank you. We thank you very, very much for coming on You Don't Know Schiff.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I know Schiff better now than I did before. And listen, Schiff's book is good. Get his book. If you like it, you're going to love mine.
Thank you again. This was really awesome. We really appreciate you taking so much time with us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
This is really a pleasurable 2 hours. Okay. Bye.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Terrific. Woo!
All right.
That was terrific. I say this a bunch on some of these interviews, but I thought that was terrific. And it reminds me a little of what Gilbert did, real showbiz history.
Yeah.
Great stuff, great stories that nobody else had kind of heard.
Yeah. And I love that he's got Bill Boggs on YouTube. And I love that he keeps populating with more and more interviews because he's had so many years worth of interviews that the fact that he had the foresight to keep all the tapes.
That is
put that all up
amazing.
there.
And I wasn't bullshitting. He had, the biggest people in the world on that show.
No, that's what was so cool. It wasn't just celebrities or athletes. It was heads of state, playwrights and authors, musicians, everything. So it was an amazing body of work that he created.
It was a perfect New York type of show, highly intelligent with a very nice guy behind it and overshadow anything. It was quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I think you hit on it in the interview about how easy he is to talk to, not just for us, but like these, huge guests that were on. You could see that they were very comfortable with him.
Makes you incredibly comfortable. He made me so comfortable before this interview, just in my last couple of years, just talking to him or texting. He's very complimentary. You believe what he's saying.
Yeah.
He read my book. He made a video of, for me without ever asking. I mean, he's just
and even his advice that just emanates from him is you're going to make mistakes, and that's comforting just to hear that. Thank you everyone for listening to You Don't Know Schiff. That was Bill Boggs, and take a look at the show notes and you can see how to get copies of his Spike books as well as how to watch Bill Boggs on YouTube. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't followed us already on Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this, please do so and spread the word.
Thank you everybody for coming, watching, listening to You Don't Know Schiff, and thank you, Lowell.
Thank you, Mark, as always.